OK.
5 seconds, guys. Here we go.
The view from the opinion pages of the newspapers now. Let's take you through them. Starting with the Telegraph. Arch Remainers will soon have no place in the Tory party, so says Alistair Heath in today's Telegraph. The man he calls their leader, Philip Hammond, is, he says, increasingly ludicrous and responsible for a scandalous betrayal. Martin Kettle says the current battle over Brexit will split the Tories but also define the future of the country. He argues the Conservatives are being reshaped in ways not seen since battles over tariffs more than a century ago in the Corn Laws. Stephen Glover in the Mail also takes aim at Philip Hammond for his intervention yesterday to urge Boris Johnson to come to a deal with the EU. He calls the former Chancellor a bitter man who is guilty of appalling sabotage. The cartoon in the Times looks at potentially how angry the prospect of no deal is making Mr Hammond. The likely looming battle between the Prime Minister and the Commons over Brexit, also the subject of the Telegraph's cartoon today, with Boris Johnson and the Speaker battling as gladiators. Also in the Times, David Aronovich reflects on the growing crisis in Hong Kong and what he sees as the return of strongmen leaders around the world. He argues the world can't drop its guard against dictators and worries that we have become less vigilant. NHS Confederation Chief Executive Neil Dixon has taken to the pages of the Daily Mail to call on the government to fix the country's social care crisis. He calls it a national disgrace that hundreds of thousands of the most vulnerable people are not securing the care which they require. Katie Glass says the Advertising Standards Authority's push to ban sexist advertisements means comedy might as well be banned too. Writing in The Sun, she says the ASA has made pants on head stupid verdicts. I didn't write that, by the way, and is controlled by those shouting loudest. Matt's cartoon on the front page of the Telegraph reflects a scene in plenty of homes this morning as A-level results are received. One nervous student says, well, you can see what the nervous student says. Let's talk about those stories. With me today to look through those, the writer Benedict Spence and City AM's comment editor Rachel Cunliffe. Welcome and good morning to both of you. We are going to start with the Telegraph, aren't we? Philip Hammond coming for a lot of stick actually today.
Yes, his big intervention in order to stop Boris's plan for a no deal over the last couple of days has had, I think, the desired response, which is the Boris team and the Brexiteers are fighting back. And it's quite similar to Stephen Glover's piece in the Mail. They're pointing out that Hammond is responsible for the complete lack of no deal preparation that went on under Theresa May's government, and that it is really not the kind of thing that former cabinet ministers do, to just step in 3 weeks after resigning to criticise the new government. Alistair Heath, though, is sort of making a wider point about what this means for the Tory party in general, because Hammond seems to think that he's leading the resistance within the Tory party, perhaps forgetting that a sizable majority of Conservative MPs voted to have Boris Johnson as their leader. It's a minority of Tory rebels that are so adamant that we're not going to leave without a deal that they might actually bring down the government. And it's not a case anymore of the Tory party kicking out the hard Brexiteers, as it might have been a couple of years ago. It's really a case of the hard Brexiteers kicking out the Remainers.
Even people like Alistair Burke, just sitting in that seat a few moments ago, actually still wants a deal. He may be critical of the government, but still wants a deal, doesn't he? Benedict, Philip Hammond, collaborator?
I mean, it always amuses me when we hear this sort of language. I mean, it just strikes you as somebody who wants to get a very bombastic piece out there that people can rally around. I mean, Philip Hammond, collaborator? No, I don't think so at all. I do think that he was a very ineffective Chancellor, and I do think that this strikes me as the exact same sort of thing as Theresa May did when she was on the out trying to secure a form of legacy so that history doesn't judge him particularly harshly. I do think that it's too late, and I just think, frankly, he's not that savvy a political operator. I think that this is fairly obvious. And I just think, therefore, that the backlash that was coming of him being painted as this, this traitor, this person who didn't do enough to, prepare for no deal, was always going to happen. So I think possibly his intervention is going to have a more negative impact than he would probably have hoped.
Yeah. Should we move on? We've talked about Stephen Glover, haven't we? Should we go on to the Times cartoon? Well, actually, that's more of Philip Hammond. So let's not do that. Let's look at another cartoon, The Telegraph, and John Bercow.
I love this. I love this cartoon. This is the Vox Populi. Yes.
You don't hold it up to me.
Hold it up, sorry.
I'm disappointed that one of them isn't a lion, frankly. The idea of, they both think that they're sort of these great champions fighting against insurmountable odds.
Was anybody surprised that John Bercow, he was at the Fringe, Edinburgh Fringe, the day before yesterday.
Comedy Festival.
Well, that doesn't surprise me at all.
And at the end, there was a question from the floor saying, something quite potentially inflammatory, to which he gave an emphatic closed answer of yes. You know, can Parliament stop a no-deal Brexit? And you could argue the politic answer might have been some, potentially or maybe, nothing to do with me, give whatever MPs decide, but actually he came out and said yes.
Yes, well, he likes the spotlight, doesn't he? I think this is actually gearing up to be a battle of which side knows the most about obscure parliamentary procedure. Obviously, John Bercow knows a fair amount, Dominic Grieve as well, Jacob Rees-Mogg on the Brexiteer side, really knows his parliamentary precedent. I really like this cartoon because people's PMQs yesterday, Boris Johnson taking unpasteurised questions from the public that had in fact been moderated by his staff before he answered them. But putting that to one side, he sort of ended saying, "Oh, we're running out of time, Pericles," which is sort of his go-to line when he runs out of things to say. And there he is.
Some broadcasters didn't take any of that. I mean,
No,
does it pose ethical questions?
It also strikes me that the thing in the background of this cartoon is, of course, that there isn't actually, they're not fighting in a packed Colosseum or anything, they're fighting in some ruins. Nobody's actually paying any attention to this, which I thought was the big joke, but perhaps that was slightly missed. But, I mean, Bercow, there's no point in him being a shrinking violet in all of this, and we all know where he stands. He's got this platform to be quite bombastic, to be the speaker who knows everything about parliamentary precedent, and he's going to be the one to stop what he sees as this great evil. So, I'm not really sure why anybody might be surprised that he would answer so emphatically on this subject, because, of course, Parliament can stop it, and he very much intends for Parliament to stop it.
About that. So I've been talking to a lot of people. I don't know if Parliament really can stop it. I think the point is people don't know. The reason this mad idea of a national unity government led by anyone but Corbyn, or as Jeremy Corbyn
seems to have just
yesterday,
disappeared as of this morning.
Yes, it's not going to happen. But the reason people were sort of clutching at that is because that would be a clear way forward to take control from this government. If there was a clear parliamentary route in order to do that, they'd be going towards that. So there may be a way. It's just that we've never been in this situation before. Our constitution, our unwritten constitution, hasn't had to deal with this kind of battle between parliament and government before. So we don't know.
Well, I think that's the point. It's not that there is necessarily a set in statute way that it will definitely block it. It's more a game of brinksmanship. Can it win that game? Absolutely it can, but equally so could the other side.
Can't think of a situation where actually the role of the media, constitutionalists, the people you put on the telly, the people who talk about this stuff, actually could end up being potentially seminal. Should we just park Brexit for a bit and talk about Hong Kong? David Aronovich.
Yes, David Aronovich and dictators, and the cult of strong men and sort of personality cults that perhaps we thought was something in the past. And he lists a few, obviously talking about what's been going on with Hong Kong and China's increasingly sort of autocratic stance there, but there are other examples. There's sort of Viktor Orban in Hungary. There's Salvini. You know a lot about Italy. I know. There's Trump. Do we dare to mention Trump? The sort of people who build
Most of these people have been democratically elected.
Yes, and that's.
The thing is, actually, in many ways, I disagree with David Aronovich on the subject of strongmen. There have always been strongmen in power. The thing is, actually, we've just chosen to ignore a lot of them because they exist in parts of the world that aren't important to us. When they, every now and then, they crop up, like, say, a Saddam Hussein, well, then suddenly, oh, it's on the rise again, or when it's happening in China. But this sort of authoritarianism has been going on in China for as long as China has been a communist state. This isn't a new thing at all. And actually, I think the response to people being more assertive in Western politics is actually because of a perceived lack of strong action on the part of politicians. I mean, we can take Hong Kong, for example. You've got any number of Western politicians going thoughts and prayers, sympathy, we stand with Hong Kong. What are they going to do about Hong Kong? They're not going to do anything. And it's that sort of inaction in the face of authoritarianism that is leading to the rise of strong men in Europe. That's the key thing. We haven't necessarily had it in Europe, but that's not to say that it hasn't happened elsewhere, and that is why we're now seeing it as a reaction to it.
I just want to finish with a different story, actually. A sort of nod to the culture wars and the Advertising Standards Agency. You can no longer show an ad if a mum is pushing a pram. Do I paraphrase incorrectly?
So this is the Advertising Standards Authority that has banned its first 2 adverts under its sexist ad ban, which is a ban that I am broadly in favour of the concept of and the attitudes behind it. But one of these ads, the Philadelphia one, had 2 dads who left a baby on a conveyor belt. They said they deliberately had dads there so that it didn't imply, rather than having mothers leaving babies, that childcare was totally to do with a feminine space kind of thing. And so it's like, you can't win. Can we not show parents now? I'm on your side on this, and I'm never on your side on
That's the thing,
this.
isn't it? There's also a very sexist stereotype, which is that men generally are useless around the house and that they can't be trusted with children.
Benedict,
So
don't
that's
play
the
the game.
exact same thing.
Don't play the game. Just don't play the game. Okay.
Don't engage.
Benedict, Rachel, thanks both very much indeed.
Thank
Thanks
you.
a lot. This is All Out Politics. Coming up next.